Morning. A high-stakes boardroom in New York City. The air is thick with the scent of expensive coffee and professional failure. On the massive screens, the numbers are bleeding red. The board is restless. Rachel Stanton, the famously blunt CEO, has no time for underperformers. In the back, a 41-year-old man sits quietly with a simple file. He is Daniel Brooks, a mid-level project manager and a single father. Rachel looks him in the eye and snaps, "Earn it or get fired." The room freezes. Daniel looks at the data map. He speaks one sentence, and the entire boardroom changes forever. Watch the man closely. Daniel Brooks was a man of steel and silence. At 41, his face carried the subtle etched lines of a life lived in the invisible gears of the city. He wasn't a shark. He didn't wear $3,000 bespoke suits or post aggressive hustle culture rants on social media to prove his worth. He was a senior project manager at Stanton Logistics Tech, a company that moved the lifeblood of the East Coast through a complex web of ports and warehouses. Daniel was responsible for a small but mission-critical slice of the company's most ambitious venture to date, Project Nexus, a fully automated AI-driven freight network designed to eliminate human error and revolutionize shipping. But to his colleagues, Daniel was an enigma, or worse, a slacker. He arrived at exactly 8:30 a.m., his movements methodical and calm, and he vanished at precisely 5:01 p.m. every single day. In the high-pressure, caffeine-fueled environment of Manhattan, where leaving early was seen as a terminal lack of ambition, Daniel was the constant subject of office whispers. The younger VPs, fueled by ego and sleep deprivation, didn't see a dedicated worker. They saw a man who wasn't all in. They saw a man who was satisfied with mediocrity because he wouldn't stay for the 8 p.m. pizza and strategy sessions. They didn't know about Leo. Daniel was a single father, a man holding a world together with one hand, while the other hand gripped a wrench or a spreadsheet. 3 years ago, his wife, Claire, had passed away after a quiet, heartbreakingly brave battle with illness. Since that day, Daniel had systematically dismantled his old life. The 60-hour work weeks, the international flights, the pursuit of the corner office. He had chosen this mid-level role with surgical intent. It allowed him to be the one to stand at the school gates to pick up 9-year-old Leo. He was the one who made the grilled cheese sandwiches with the crusts cut off. He was the one who read the bedtime stories about galaxies and heroes. He had traded the prestige of power for the sacred privilege of being a present father. He didn't need a title on a door. He needed a schedule that worked for his son. However, Project Nexus was currently in a terrifying death spiral. The integration logic Daniel's team managed was being blamed for a massive system-wide lag. Implementation costs had skyrocketed by 40%, draining the company's cash reserves. The transport partners, hardened men who ran fleets of thousands, were threatening to pull out because the automated system was too rigid and disconnected from the road. The launch date had been pushed back twice, and the board of directors was calling for blood. The atmosphere at Stanton Logistics had turned toxic. Senior executives were frantically looking for a scapegoat, and Daniel's quiet, unambitious department was the perfect target. The boardroom on the 45th floor felt like a courtroom. The air was sterile, smelling of lemon polish and nervous sweat. The board of directors sat in high-back leather chairs, their faces etched with the kind of grim, clinical determination that usually preceded a mass layoff. Daniel sat at the very end of the mahogany table, his old laptop open, but his eyes focused on a simple printed sheet of raw data. He heard the VP of sales blaming the software architecture. He heard the CTO blaming the hardware sensors. He heard everyone fighting for their own survival, tossing technical jargon around like grenades. Mila, the head of HR, looked at Daniel from across the room. She felt a mix of pity and deep concern. She knew he was a brilliant engineer, but she also knew that Rachel Stanton didn't care about good intentions or personal struggles. Rachel worshipped results. And right now, the results were a sea of red ink. Daniel felt the weight of the stairs, the collective judgment of a room that measured value by the hours a light stayed on in an office window. He took a slow, grounding breath, reaching into his pocket to touch the note Leo had tucked into his lunch that morning. "Good luck at the big meeting, Dad. You're the smartest guy I know. See you at soccer." The shouting reached a crescendo, then suddenly stopped. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Rachel Stanton walked in. She didn't say hello. She didn't smile. She walked to the head of the table, leaned her weight on her hands, and looked at the data map on the wall. The storm had arrived and there was nowhere to hide. Rachel Stanton was a force of nature, cold, precise, and entirely unsympathetic to the concept of trying. She believed in shipping or dying. She went around the table, person by person, her questions like scalpels, cutting through the excuses of men twice her age. When she reached Daniel at the end of the table, the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The silence was so heavy it felt like physical pressure. Daniel stood up and presented his report. He didn't use flashy slides or corporate buzzwords about synergy or pivoting. He spoke in the rhythmic, clinical tone of an auditor. He spoke about the technical friction between the AI core and the legacy trucks. He spoke about the deep-seated psychological resistance from the veteran drivers who felt the machines were stealing their intuition. He laid out the reality of the bottlenecks with a brutal honesty that made the other VPs cringe. Rachel watched him with a cold, predatory intensity. She didn't look at his charts. She looked at the man. She noticed the slight fraying on his cuff and the way he didn't look down when she glared at him. When he finished, she didn't ask a technical question. She looked at the digital clock on the wall. It was 10:15 a.m., and then she leaned in. "Daniel," she began, her voice a low, dangerous vibration that made the pens on the table seem to rattle. "I've seen your logs. I've seen the security swipes. You're never here past 5. While this company is burning through $20 million a month, you're out the door before the sun even sets. You don't join the late-night troubleshooting sessions. You don't attend the weekend war rooms. And now you're giving me a list of human factors and risks instead of a list of milestones. Excuses don't ship products, Daniel, and they certainly don't save careers in this building." She leaned in even closer, her eyes locked onto his, searching for a crack in his composure. "I have a board of directors that wants to gut this project today. They want to fire the entire engineering floor. I'm giving this team one last window to prove the value of Nexus, but I don't have room for part-time leaders in a full-time crisis. I don't care about your hobbies or your evening plans. I care about the survival of this company." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle over the room like a suffocating fog. "Earn it, or get fired. I want a viable solution for the integration lag and a plan to win back the transport partners on my desk by tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., or your department will be the first one we liquidate. Do I make myself absolutely clear, Mr. Brooks?" The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the high-speed servers in the next room. Several VPs looked away, embarrassed by the sheer, unadulterated brutality of the statement. They expected Daniel to scramble. They expected him to beg for more time, to mention his son, or to throw his team under the bus to save himself. But Daniel Brooks didn't flinch. He didn't blush. He didn't even blink. He stood there with a posture that wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't defeated either. He looked at Rachel, and for a fleeting second, she saw something she didn't expect, a calm, analytical pity. It was as if he were looking at a faulty circuit or a broken algorithm instead of a powerful, terrifying CEO. It was the look of a man who knew something she didn't. "I understand the deadline, Rachel," Daniel said, his voice steady and remarkably resonant. "But before I go back to my desk to write that solution, can I ask the room one question? Just one." Rachel crossed her arms over her chest, her jaw set like stone. "Make it quick. You're already wasting time." Daniel turned toward the massive monitor, pointing not at the red numbers of the budget, but at the success metrics chart in the far bottom corner, the one everyone had been ignoring. "Why are we measuring success only by the launch date? Why is that the only variable we worship?" A few people at the table scoffed. The CFO rolled his eyes, sighing loudly. "Because the launch date is when the revenue starts, Daniel. That's business 101. No launch, no money. It's not a philosophy project." No, Daniel countered, his voice gaining a sudden, unbreakable strength that filled the room. The launch date is when the risk starts. We are failing because we are treating this logistics network like a software update for a smartphone. We are trying to flip a switch on the whole East Coast and hoping the world adjusts to us. But logistics isn't just code. It's physical. It's the weight of the trucks. It's the ice on the roads. It's the human beings who have to trust the system. We are measuring the wrong thing, and because of that, we are solving a problem that doesn't actually exist. He looked at Rachel, who was now leaning back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she processed the sudden, violent change in his energy. The 9 to 5 guy was gone. In his place was someone who sounded like he had seen 1,000 storms and knew exactly how to navigate them. He wasn't a manager anymore. He was an architect. You told me to earn it, Daniel said quietly, his gaze unwavering. I intend to, but I'm not going to earn it by giving you a fake timeline or a polished slide deck to make a spreadsheet look pretty for the board. I'm going to earn it by showing you why this project is currently built on a foundation of sand. I'm going to show you how to build it on stone. For the first time in 10 years, Rachel Stanton didn't have a comeback. She watched Daniel as he sat back down and began to methodically reorganize his files. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't panicked. He was working with the precision of a surgeon. The room felt different. The air had shifted. The scapegoat had just become the only person in the building who wasn't afraid of the truth. Rachel felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, genuine curiosity. The silence in the boardroom stretched for a long, uncomfortable minute before Daniel spoke again. He didn't wait for permission this time. He stood back up, walked to the digital whiteboard, and with a few swift swipes, erased the cluttered charts of the VPs. He drew a single simple map of a small, nondescript logistics hub in Jersey City. The mistake we're making isn't in the code, Daniel explained, his voice clinical, focused, and impossible to ignore. It's in the ambition. We are trying to implement Project Nexus across the entire Eastern Seaboard simultaneously: New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and Baltimore. We are spread so thin that our engineers can't troubleshoot local errors, and our partners feel like they're being ignored by a faceless, broken machine. That's why costs are rising. We're throwing money at the scale instead of the stability. We're trying to build a skyscraper without letting the concrete dry. He pointed to the small hub he had drawn. We need to stop the global rollout today. We need to cancel the contracts for the other 12 hubs and focus 100% of our resources, human and financial, on this one location. A pilot deployment, a cellular success. If we can make this one hub operate at 99% efficiency for 60 days, the data we gain will be worth more than 100 failed launches. We prove the model first, then we copy-paste. A senior director at the table, a man who had been with the company since its inception, interrupted. Daniel, that would look like a total retreat to the investors. We promised a digital revolution. If we tell them we're just running a test in Jersey City, the stock will crater by noon. Investors hate retreats, but they hate bankruptcies even more, Daniel replied, his gaze shifting to the director. The current path leads to a catastrophic system failure within 6 months. My way leads to a proven, de-risked model that we can scale across the country with absolute certainty. It's not a retreat, sir. It's an anchor. It's the only thing that will keep this company from drifting into the rocks. Rachel Stanton stepped closer to the board. She was a woman who prided herself on her macro vision, but as she looked at Daniel's simple drawing, she realized she had been so focused on the distant horizon that she had tripped over the threshold. Why didn't we hear this 3 months ago, Daniel? Why wait until I threatened your job to say this? Daniel looked at her, a faint, weary smile on his lips. Because everyone in this company is terrified of you, Rachel. They are so busy trying to look like they're working 80 hours a week that they don't have time to actually think. They give you the answers they think will keep them in their seats, even if those answers are dangerous lies. I didn't say anything because I wasn't asked to lead. I was asked to compile reports and check for typos. I stayed in my lane because my lane allowed me to go home to my son. And you think you can lead this transition? She asked, her voice dropping into a whisper. I know I can, Daniel said simply, because I've seen this exact failure happen before. I've lived through the wreckage. The room went stone cold again. The lead strategist leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Where? This AI integration technology didn't even exist 5 years ago. The technology didn't, but the human psychology did, Daniel said, his eyes darkening with a memory. 10 years ago, I was part of the lead team that tried to automate the freight rail system in Northern Europe. We did exactly what you're doing now. We tried to go big, we ignored the local workers, and we prioritized the launch date over the logic. The system collapsed in 3 weeks. The company went under. I spent 2 years of my life cleaning up the legal mess and watching good people lose their homes. The boardroom was stunned. Most people here had impressive Ivy League degrees and polished resumes, but none of them had the battle scars Daniel was describing. He wasn't just a mid-level project manager. He was a survivor of the very ghost they were currently chasing. He had been a high-level strategist who had intentionally stepped down to find peace. I didn't put that on my resume, Daniel continued, because I didn't want a job where I had to be a warrior again. I wanted a job that allowed me to be a father. But if you want Project Nexus to survive, you have to stop the war and start the engineering. You need to let the team sleep. You need to let them focus on one problem at a time. And you need to stop measuring their value by how many lights are on in the office at midnight. Performative work is a parasite, Rachel. It's killing your company. He looked at his watch. 11:30 a.m. The pilot plan is already in my head. I can have the full technical breakdown, the risk assessment, and the budget reallocation on your desk by 4 p.m. today. But at 5 p.m., I am leaving to take my son to his soccer game. If that means I'm fired tomorrow morning, then I'll accept that. But the plan will still be the right one. The decision is yours. Rachel Stanton looked at Daniel Brooks for a long time. She saw a man who had everything to lose but absolutely nothing to prove. She saw her own management style reflected in his honest, tired eyes and realized that the culture she had created was actively killing her legacy. She saw the Ice Queen mask through his perspective, and for the first time, it looked like a prison. She turned to the board, her voice sharp and decisive. Cancel the afternoon strategy session with the partners, and tell the CTO to meet me in the Jersey City hub tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. We're going to the floor. She looked back at Daniel. Brooks, have the report on my desk by 4. And Daniel? Yes? Tell your son good luck at his game. I hope he wins. Daniel nodded, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through the professional mask. He didn't pump his fist. He didn't gloat. He simply walked back to his small, cluttered desk and started to work on the only thing that mattered, the solution. He had earned his seat. The next 6 months were the most intense and the quietest in the history of the company. Rachel Stanton made a radical decision that shocked the industry. She followed Daniel's cellular success model. She pulled the plug on the national campaign and focused the entire weight of the corporation on a single, nondescript warehouse in Jersey City. Daniel was appointed as the lead of the pilot operations. He didn't get a corner office. He spent his days in a high-visibility vest on the warehouse floor, talking to the drivers and the forklift operators. He brought the engineers out of their glass bubbles and made them watch how a real truck actually docks in the rain. He didn't change his hours. He still left at 5:01 p.m. Initially, there was resistance from the board. They saw the slower pace as a sign of weakness. But then, the data started to trickle in. Because the team was focused on only one location, they were solving bugs in hours that used to take weeks. Because the workers felt heard, the turnover rate dropped to 0. The Nexus hub was operating at a level of efficiency that the simulations had deemed impossible. Rachel Stanton visited the hub every Tuesday. She stopped wearing the power suits and started wearing sneakers. She watched Daniel lead. He didn't shout. He didn't give grand speeches. He led by asking questions. He led by being the person who stayed calm when a sensor failed. One afternoon, Rachel found Daniel in the break room, sharing a coffee with an older truck driver who had been one of the most vocal opponents of the automation. They were laughing about a bad route in Pennsylvania. "You've turned him," Rachel noted as she walked over. "I didn't turn him. Daniel replied, leaning against the vending machine. I just showed him that the AI isn't there to replace his hands. It's there to be his second pair of eyes. He likes the system now because it actually works. It doesn't fight him. Rachel looked at the busy floor. The board approved the expansion to the next 5 hubs this morning, Daniel. They're calling it a miracle of strategic focus. They want to give you a vice presidency at the headquarters. Daniel shook his head slowly. I'm happy right where I am, Rachel. If I move back to the 40th floor, I'll start looking at the horizon again. I'd rather keep my eyes on the floor. The board is going to be frustrated, she warned. The board has their profit, Daniel said with a wink. They'll be fine. Rachel realized then that the most powerful thing Daniel had done wasn't fixing the project. It was fixing her. He had shown her that you could be a leader without being a tyrant. He had proven that earning it didn't mean sacrificing your life. It meant being so good at your job that you could define your own boundaries. She began to implement the Brooks policy throughout the company. Flexible hours for parents, mandatory thinking time, where no meetings were allowed, a focus on quality over quantity. The culture of the company shifted from a sprint to a marathon. The Ice Queen was beginning to be known as the strategic CEO. The pilot was so successful that the stock price doubled. The company was no longer a tech startup with potential. It was the gold standard of the industry. And at the center of it all was a man who still took his lunch in a brown paper bag and never missed a soccer game. 3 months later, the full rollout of Project Nexus was complete. The East Coast was now a synchronized, automated marvel, and the rest of the country was clamoring to join the network. Stanton Logistics was the undisputed king of the market. A celebration was held in that same 40th floor boardroom, but the room was different. The red numbers were gone, replaced by a sea of vibrant, stable green. The board members weren't shouting, they were smiling. There was music, laughter, and a sense of genuine accomplishment. Daniel Brooks arrived at the party, but he didn't stay long. He wasn't there for the champagne or the speeches. He stood in the back, watching Rachel address the crowd. She looked different, younger, more relaxed, and remarkably human. We built a great system, Rachel told the room, her eyes scanning the crowd. But more importantly, we learned how to build a great company. We learned that the most important part of any machine is the people who stand behind it. And we learned that sometimes the person with the most valuable answer is the one who isn't trying to impress anyone. She looked directly at Daniel. She didn't call him onto the stage. She knew he wouldn't want that. She simply raised her glass in a silent, profound toast. Daniel gave a small, respectful nod, then checked his watch. It was 4:55 p.m. He turned and walked toward the elevators, leaving the celebration behind. As he walked through the marble lobby, the security guards nodded to him. He was no longer the 9-to-5 guy. He was the architect. Outside, the cool evening air of New York greeted him. He walked to the designated pickup zone where Leo was waiting, sitting on a bench with a soccer ball at his feet. "Hey, Dad!" Leo cried, jumping up. "Did you finish the big project?" Daniel picked up his son, swinging him around as the city lights began to twinkle overhead. "Yeah, pal, we finished it." "Did you fix the whole thing?" Leo asked with wide, curious eyes. Daniel smiled, setting him down and taking his hand as they walked toward the subway. "No, Leo, we didn't fix the whole thing. We just asked a better question." The story of the single dad and the CEO didn't end with a wedding or a corporate takeover. It ended with a realization that true strength doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be aggressive. And it certainly doesn't need to stay past 5 p.m. True strength is the courage to be a father first and a professional second. And in a room full of people trying to be someone, Daniel Brooks was the only one who was actually himself. The lights of the New York skyline shimmered behind them, a city built on ambition, but for one family, it was a city built on the truth. If you believe that real leadership isn't about speaking the loudest, but seeing the problem clearly, subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever proven someone wrong without ever raising your voice? What was your better question?